Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Vote 2020 Board of Education, a virtual candidates forum presenting candidates for the Santa Monica Malibu Board of Education. This forum is being co-sponsored by the Committee for Racial Justice and the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. Both co-sponsors are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations, and never support or oppose candidates for public office. My name is Karen Gunn, and I'll be your moderator for this forum. As you probably know, this year all registered California voters will automatically receive a vote by mail ballot in early October, and voters are being encouraged to return their ballots early to make sure they will be received by the registrar's office in time to be counted. For these reasons, we have committed to holding our forums earlier this year. We want you, our voters, to have the opportunity to hear from our local candidates by early October. This year, we have 3 open seats for 4-year terms each. We have invited all 8 candidates who are qualified to run for this office to participate, and we're pleased that all 8 confirmed their attendance. However, we are sad to report that candidate Maria Leon Vasquez had to withdraw due to a death in her family. So we'll be hearing from 7 of the 8 candidates, hopefully, for Board of Education. Each candidate participating in tonight's forum will have the opportunity to answer a variety of questions related to the overarching theme of transformation in the era of Black Lives Matter, with a maximum of 1 minute for each response. Because we will be asking questions that we want candidates to have time to understand and think about, the co-sponsors sent a list of questions to all Board of Education candidates in advance. The questions we ask tonight are drawn from that list. The candidates do not know, however, which ones we will choose for them. Questions have been gathered in advance from the co-sponsoring organizations and through community outreach, and will be asked in random order according to a blind matrix created by the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. Timing is important this evening, and it will be done by Sharon Hart of the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. She's represented by the timer you see on your screen. It is a countdown timer, and you will see it go from 60 to 0 for each question. All candidates participating tonight have signed a confirmation form and committed to standards of civility and courtesy, helping to maintain an atmosphere of respect and tolerance throughout the forum. We thank them for agreeing to that. So let's begin with the first round of questions. If elected, you will be part of the governing body that makes decisions for the public school students of Santa Monica and Malibu, including our children and grandchildren. So naturally, we'd like to get to know you. So as I call your name, please tell us who you are and why you're running for Board of Education. You each will have 1 minute to answer. Mr. Feldman, please begin.
Hi there, and thank you for this opportunity to address the voters of Santa Monica and Malibu. My name is Jason Feldman, and I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm the father of 2 daughters in the Santa Monica Malibu School District. And the reason I'm running is for my daughters and for their future, and for the future of all of our children in our community. As a civil rights attorney, I've always been fighting for the underdog. I've represented domestic violence victims against their abusers. I've been fighting for against discrimination and for the rights of our most vulnerable people, including prisoners, including people that have been convicted of crimes and accused of crimes, and also fighting against workplace discrimination. And now I want to fight for the students and members of the community as a member of the school board. One of the, many parents came to me and asked me to run, and what they were talking about was a lack of transparency on the board. They just don't understand the direction.
Thank you. Ms. Hickman. please make sure to.
I unmuted. Thank you
Okay.
so much. Thank you for putting this together, and thank you for bringing us all together to talk about these important topics. I grew up in this district. I went to Juan Cabrillo Elementary in Malibu. I went to Malibu Park, and I went to Santa Monica High School. It was before there was a Malibu High School. And I am a full-time working mother, a parent of a 3-year-old. And I was encouraged to run for school board. And as I learned more about what was happening, it became apparent that I needed to advocate in this district that I love so much so that I can protect my child's ability to go to this public school district.
Thank you so much. Mr. Johnson.
Hi, thank you. I'm Stephen Johnson. I've lived in the Santa Monica for 25 years. I was an SMMUSD parent, K through 12. My daughter went to Grant, Jams, and Samo High. She's now luckily at college, actually going to college in some other state. My wife is Emily Arms. She teaches part-time English at Santa Monica College. And I'm running because I want to make sure that the Santa Monica schools that my daughter had access to, from class sizes to special opportunities throughout, are as good as they are for future kids as they were for her. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gunn. I'd like to start by just sending my condolences to my friend and colleague, Maria Leon Vasquez, during this difficult time for herself and her husband, Tony. I'm currently the president of the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District Board of Education. This is my end of my first term. I was elected in 2016. I'm a PTA dad. I was a PTA president at 2 school sites for 4 years. As a PTA dad, when I saw problems, I did something. That's how I was brought up. When you see something that isn't right, you take action. In my professional life, I am a documentary filmmaker. I work with mostly victims of trauma and dealing with spiritual resistance, how we move on. I work closely with Holocaust survivors for the past 2 decades. I've been working with Rwandan survivors for the past few years. And this important work has allowed me to teach and to lecture and to build curriculum. And it's also taught me to see the world through other eyes. And I think that's the most important thing as we look to build empathy and understanding in our children. So thank you for this opportunity tonight.
Thank you. Ms. May.
I'm Dun May, and I also want to express my condolences to Maria Leon Vasquez. May God bless his soul. And I'm running to give back. I have many years, I have decades of experience teaching diverse pupil populations. I am a Samo High graduate, a parent of Samo High graduates. I hold a master's degree in mathematics. I'm a former Malibu resident. I'm a member of the Zoroastrian community, which is one of the world's smallest minorities. And I believe I'm the only candidate here who has extensive teaching experience. And also I believe I'm the only candidate who could be considered a person of color. In addition to participating in usual school board activities, I plan to begin advocating for relatively inexpensive, often
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Smith?
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for having us. And Maria, I hope I send my condolences as well. I've been advocating for the schools in our district for over a decade. I've been a PTA president at both Roosevelt and Lincoln schools. I became the president of the Santa Monica Malibu Council of PTAs between 2016 and 2018. And I served, I co-chaired 2 local voter-supported school measures in our district, GS, which brings in $6 to $8 million a year, or will bring in again $6 to $8 million a year to our SMMUSD general fund and the SMS school bond. So I've been, I have 2 children in the district, and I've been on every campus in our district. I've worked with teachers, administrators, staff, students, parents. I'm dedicated to the schools, and I want to serve them by becoming a school board member and continue that kind of service.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to the second question. The Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District is now officially an anti
I'm sorry, Dr. Gunn, we can't hear you right now. Can you please check what your input is for your sound?
So I'm not sure if you heard the
we can hear you.
question.
Now we can hear you. Can you please repeat the question?
Certainly. Again, I apologize to everyone on the panel as well as in the group. It's been some technological challenges. I'll read the question again. Everyone can hear. Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District is now officially an anti-racist school district. What changes in curriculum are necessary to ensure that all SMMUSD students receive a solid anti-racist education? I'll begin with Jennifer Smith.
Okay, thank you. So the fairly new social justice standards would need to be deeply rooted at every grade level, so all children see themselves in their education. With the ACES program that's begun, and I know that there are a few classes to be taken, but I think we need to make a broader selection for our high school students to be able to graduate with that necessary class. I think that we need to implement and evaluate those social justice standards and those classes and adjust where we need to. I think there's, I'm open to other avenues as well. I think we need to connect curriculum to real world experiences and make sure that kids are engaged in content. I think that that in our culture in our schools, being an anti-racist, I would think we have to talk to our children very deeply about what that means and who they are and who they want to become. I think that, and that can be involved in their social, I'm so sorry, there can be involved in their, how we treat how we educate a whole child is what.
Thank you. Ms. May.
I think one of the things that would be helpful would be to highlight great African-American heroes, such as Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King Jr., and many, many others. Also, I think it would be good to change anything in the curriculum that's not accurate. We should make sure that the freshman seminar, the US history course, and science courses are all taught through the lens of truth. We should promote correct English. We should disallow school material that is unnecessarily violent or immoral. We should incorporate information that's going to strengthen people's immune systems and information about the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet. Even though it may seem that's unrelated, it really is, because good health.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. King.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. So as not to repeat, I will add to what Jennifer Smith said with the K-12 social justice framework. She mentioned ACES, American Cultures, Ethnic Studies graduation requirement, which the board passed 3 years ago. I do want to point out a great example of how the new curriculum will look like. Our 11th grade US history class has now been changed to show multiple points of view. That is what ethnic studies does. It brings in 3 to 5 different points of view. So we're learning a history, not just through the people who wrote the book, but through what really happened, as to what Dunn May said, learning the historical truths, learning more than just one version of what happened. I do want to point out that something that we hope to see from these types of classes, it helps all children. We create more pluralistic students when we have expansion of ethnic studies classes. I also want to point out, you'll see a change from our teachers, where our teachers are going to move from teacher-centered instruction to higher order thinking skills for our children as we adopt these curriculum models.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I have just a few things to add. Some of the key themes that I read when I read through the curriculum documentation, identity, diversity, justice, and action, they seem really well suited to our district in its pursuit of its social justice curriculum. This is one of the very few truly diverse campuses, truly diverse districts in our county where fairly much everybody is represented. With this curriculum, I especially appreciate the way the standards are tailored to the grade levels and how they offer framework for teaching tolerance and anti-bias. When I do think about some of the past initiatives, the sum of it all usually just amounts to slogans and workshops with no follow through. So we can't let that happen. In my opinion, what's needed above all is the willingness to teach the hard history, to do so in a way that engages the students and arms them with facts, not just feelings. History textbooks are notoriously bland and reductive. So we'll need our teachers to bring uncomfortable truths to the fore, to discuss and debate and make everything real to carry forward.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hickman. I think you've got to unmute.
Here it is.
There you go.
So yeah, I think all the prior candidates did address curriculum. I think I would just like to add that that I think that smaller class sizes and increasing, I know that there is a lot of teacher training happening right now around this sort of thing, and creating that culture in the teachers and the administration to really be making sure that all of these curriculum implementations are happening and they're living and breathing documents.
Thank you. Mr. Feldman.
Thank you. Right, we have a new race and social justice curriculum. We need to figure out a way to track the effectiveness of that curriculum. You know, the main thing is, is we have to know our history, right? Like Mr. Johnson said, we have to have a fact-based American history that's fair and even-handed, that creates good citizens. But the main thing, and this all needs to start right at the kindergarten level, but the main thing is not as much teaching our students what to think, but how to think. We need to teach them to be critical thinkers and to be able to identify bias in a system, to be able to identify prejudice, and to figure out over the course of being educated who they are and what role they can play in a harmonious society. And the district can play a role in all this beyond just the curriculum. The district needs to lead by example. We need to identify racism where it's occurring. We need to identify the racism in our own system.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next round, and I'd like to welcome Mr. Coleman, who's joining us. I will be asking two different questions, and they will be answered by a subset of those of you who are on the panel this evening. So the next question will be directed at Mr. King, Mr. Coleman, and Mr. Feldman. The question is, what are some of the main things students need to understand about race and racism before they graduate from Santa Monica, Malibu, or Olympic high schools? The first person this is directed to is Mr. King.
Great, thank you so much. Definitely more than 1 minute to address this. I believe that students need to see the world through multiple perspectives. We need to see and understand how other people feel so we can genuinely engage in conversation. Something that I'm excited about that goes to our last question, I believe our students have no idea of where they live. They don't know the history of their own community, let alone the history of the world around them. I would like to see us learn our Santa Monica history. We could learn sociology, we could learn economics, we can learn environmental injustice. Well, there's so much to learn from just around us. How do we expect our students to change the future if they don't understand the past of their own community, the 8 square miles? So I know it's hard to legislate empathy and awareness, but I believe that's what we can do. And I think that's what our children need to know, our students need to know when they graduate. They need to know that they are part of something that is bigger than just themselves. And I believe that's the empathy that we're trying to engage them in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Good evening. It's good to get through the technological hurdle.
Yes.
The comments relative to how children are to gain perspective as it relates to racism is actually twofold. A lot of young folks experience multiple cultures in ways that we never did as young people. And yet this question of how are we going to better humanity is a lens with which they want to spend more time with. And yet we cannot just preface this by saying the students need to learn this, because this doesn't start with the students. This actually starts at home. Students learn from their parents. And so this question is not solely something that adults need to put on children. This is something that we as parents need to engage with and take on our own selves. My 12-year-old last year says, you know, why are we only studying Black history in February? Is there no Black?
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I need to move on to Jason Feldman.
Thank you. The question is, what our students need to take away from race and social justice curriculum? You know, for first and foremost, they need to know their history. They need to know where our society started and how far we've come. And as difficult and as trying as things are now, it's been worse. It's been worse even relatively soon. And it's also important to know all of the conflicts that we're still fighting. Some of these issues that unbelievably are still around in 2020, that were here in the 60s, that were here in the 1860s. But also how relative prejudice is. When you look at a larger worldview and you look at some conflicts around the world, maybe between Catholics and Christians, and maybe between groups that from far away seem really similar, it can really put a perspective on what prejudice is and how silly it is at its core, and how it's about.
Thank you. The next question will be directed at Ms. May, Ms. Hickman, Ms. Smith, and Mr. Johnson. What proactive and preventative measures should be used to address the racial climate in our schools? And I'll start with you, Ms. May.
I think we should emphasize the positive, emphasize the great African-American people that, like Martin Luther King. I think we should remember his edict about judging a person by the content of his character, not by the color of his skin. I think we should empower our children to realize that they are children of God, that they have great potential, and we should encourage them to consume material that is positive and uplifting, that's going to reinforce the goodness within themselves, the uniqueness within themselves, and disallow in-school material which is unnecessarily violent or immoral. There's a lot that we can also do in terms of giving them information, correct, up-to-date information.
Thank you. Ms. Hickman.
So I think that John Keane and Dun May are speaking. I do believe that community building and this awareness of community values is a culture that needs to be adopted. I hate to go back to classroom sizes being smaller, but I feel like these are such intense topics that that if we really are to master them, there needs to be smaller bodies, and when things go wrong, teachers need to be able to really facilitate this improvement with our racial environment.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Proactive and preventive measures for racial climate in our schools. I think the Santa Monica High School Dear Samo High has opened a lot of eyes. I think that we should continue to listen to the experiences of our students. I think we can show proactively, I think we can show ourselves in a racially diverse way in many ways in our schools. I think we can celebrate all races and cultures, and we can do it in staffing, in words, in actions, even in our art. The social justice standards and the classes that are being provided, the affinity groups that are being formed, the dialogue on race, identity, and culture are really good starting points. I think we have to understand where our students are and the reality of the culture at the school, and we can heal the harm that has been done. And I think that we need to make sure that it is never brushed over in years to come. We need to be committed to it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I'm going to focus on what I feel is a lack of representation, and that lack of representation contributes to a lack of a shared sense of community. I want to find ways to proactively make our most successful district programs be more representative and inclusive of all students, but especially Black students. That's going to not just come from acceleration of achievement in the early grades, which I'm always going to come back to, but we need to be actively recruiting students into the pipelines of our flagship programs that define our district. How do we get more Black students into immersion? How do we get more Latinos involved in ASB? How do we get more young women into engineering? How do we get more young men into choir? That's going to come from teachers in the classroom identifying students who have potential and working with them, but it's also going to be getting the parents in the loop. A lot of parents don't know what the opportunities are. They don't know what the pipelines are for success unless they have some kind of an inside hidden curriculum help from another parent. It's a virtuous cycle, and students will see other students like themselves engaged in every aspect of campus life.
Thank you so much. Let me move forward with the next question, which will be directed at all of you. What do you think about the concept of racial affinity peer groups? And with what grades do you think it should be most effective and why? I'm going to begin with Mr. Keene.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. I believe that my role as a board member is to place our teachers, our principals, our administrators in positions to succeed and to run their communities. I think Dr. Shelton at Samo High has been given the support. He's been given the commitment by the board. He's been given the commitment by Dr. Drotti to address this at Samo High. And I think he has already started this process. I do not know which grade levels affinity groups will work best at, but I do have faith in empowering Dr. Shelton to make those decisions. We as a board have strongly committed. If you go to Dr. Nagara's report, one thing that has to happen is commitment and then consistency, steadfast consistency to an ideal. Dr. Shelton knows he has that support from Dr. Drotti and the board, and I trust him to develop this at Samo High. And then I hope our other secondary schools or elementary schools will adopt this program as well.
Thank you so much. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. Yes, indeed, as John described, Dr. Shelton and other leaders at Samo High have moved forward with affinity groups. They did so in the wake of some of the challenges that came out from the Samo High student Instagram blog. And that's a good thing. However, some of the students that actually were negatively affected by that weren't on that particular initiative. But affinity groups can work. I don't know how they may work within the culture of the houses actually at Samo High. My son went to Samo High and he thought that the houses actually created a disengagement between different houses, certain levels of competition that were less than effective. And so I think we want to monitor affinity groups. Concepts are good, and then we have to see how they actually play out in real time with students, and we want to be clear on seeing how that works.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Oh, yeah. I think a high school is an appropriate place to start with affinity groups, and I do think that we could look into making accommodating programs down in younger grades. I think affinity groups are a place to start, but maybe not to stop. I think the groups can create understanding and teach kids how to talk about race. It can lead to better culture cultural climate at the school, but do they create change, I guess is my question. And I think we should keep an eye on it, and we should transition it from affinity groups to what we think and feel like what change needs to come from those groups and how we can implement it. I think that they can, I was thinking about Mr. Coleman's statement about the houses. I do think that over time, the house system has been played down a bit, as my children are both in high school at the moment and don't have much house commitment. So I think that, oh, sorry, it's my time.
Well, thank you so much. Mr. Feldman, I'll turn to you.
Thank you. Yes, I think affinity groups are part of the answer, but not the complete answer. I think it can help with students feeling supported and not alone, but I'm not sure it helps with understanding of other groups. And it has to be part of a greater solution. It's not in and of itself going to solve all its problems, but it can lend some important support.
Thank you. I'll turn to Mr. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. I also trust Principal Shelton and where he's taking us with the current initiative to form affinity groups. I also agree that high school is probably the right place for it because people's self-identities become pretty nuanced by the time you get to high school. I think if we learned anything from the Dear Samo High Instagram account is that there are a lot of voices that are going unheard. And there are a lot of students, if you read through every single slide on that, you'll see that the big buckets, the white, black, brown, the big buckets don't necessarily express what these students feel as an identity that might otherwise be related to economic, ethnic, national origin, sexuality, gender identity. I think affinity peer groups can help these students find their identities that are more specific than those big buckets and help them express themselves in ways that otherwise are drowned out in the larger conversations about race.
Thank you. Ms. May, I'll turn to you next.
Okay, so I think affinity groups can be helpful because they can give a person a sense of belonging, which is a very important need in a human being. But they can also be divisive. And also they don't have to be done in terms of race. They can be done in terms of some special interest, whether it's art or science or math or music or whatever. And also, I just want to say that sometimes too much emphasis on identifying as being in a certain group can be counterproductive. I think, we need to kind of broaden our perspective to just think about ourselves as human beings and, be willing to include everybody. And sure, we can have some group and have that feeling of belonging, but at the same time, there shouldn't be any pressure to identify as, overly as a person of color or as.
Thank you. Ms. Hickman.
Hi, I like the idea of affinity groups, and I actually think conceptually they could start much earlier than high school. And just thinking back on my experiences, I mean, I already remember in our district at kindergarten, first grade, my mother's Indigenous, and that racism that starts at kindergarten level and through second grade, maybe affinity groups wouldn't start that early, but certainly 9, 10, 11-year-olds could certainly benefit from belonging, the sense of belonging that Dunmay talked about. And it doesn't mean that it needs to create separation, but it could give people clearer perspectives.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next question, which will also be answered by all of the candidates. Do you think that Black students face challenges and obstacles that other students do not face? If so, do you think Black students deserve extra support in dealing with these challenges and obstacles? Further, if so, what are some of the best ways in which the school district can provide this support? I'm going to begin with Mr. Feldman.
Yes, of course they face extra obstacles, but I wouldn't like to, think or talk about it or advocate for policies that just seek to help Black students. It's about socioeconomically vulnerable students across the board, and Black people, Black students would certainly qualify for that. And I think it has to come with extra support from school in terms of career planning, in terms of counseling, in terms of peer groups and tutoring. And I think all these things can come together, but I think it should be for any student who's facing challenges. And I think it can be a broad cross section of students. We need to have a safety net for all our vulnerable students, and that certainly includes Black students.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I'll turn to you.
Thank you. I also agree that Black students face historical and systemic obstacles that are unique among minorities in this country. But adding to these challenges, in our district in particular, we've seen significant loss of African-American families due to gentrification and shifting demographics in traditional Black neighborhoods. Our declining population of Black students are feeling pressure from all sides in a way that's different than for Latinos or Asian Americans or other ethnic minorities. So in my opinion, instead of personalized programs at the high school level, I would choose to invest instead in personalization in the primary grades to guarantee every child is reading at grade level by third grade and still reading at grade level as they enter middle school. The research clearly shows that closing the achievement gap with Black students in particular, but students in general, begin in the early primary grades. We need to throw everything we have at the elementary schools, class size back to a 20-to-1 ratio, literacy coaches, pull-out programs, aids, training, parent coaching, everything.
Thank you so much. Mr. Coleman.
Yes, well, it's clear that many students of color have faced challenges, Black students especially. I would reframe the concept of achievement gap. Even though microaggressions and biases do exist, when you continue to use language and connote that someone has a deficit or a problem and they create that narrative, that's challenging for those students to start from that perspective. And so I would look more towards the character strengths. I would look more towards the robust characteristics that all students have, and in particular Black students have, to showcase the creativity, the grit, the resilience that is inside of them, and move forward with those strengths to ensure and enable them in moving forward. And along with that, to create psychological safety, because you cannot learn if you feel psychologically unsafe. And so those microaggressions that may come from students and biases that may come from staff, those things really need to be addressed, because all the positive interventions in the world are not going to help a kid be able to sort of be their best self if they're facing.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. King.
Yes, I want to build on what Keith just said. That idea of safety. We need to create safe spaces at our schools where students can be heard and parents can be heard. We know factually that there are difficulties, there are biases that Black students face that white students do not. It is not just merely a socioeconomically disadvantaged thing, because a socioeconomically disadvantaged white student will most likely perform better than a non-socioeconomically disadvantaged Black student. So there are systemic institutional problems in place. We need students to feel safe. We need parents to feel they can get the supports that they need. Schools are institutions. And there's like Mr. Johnson talked about earlier, if you don't have the inside knowledge, how do I get help? And we know it's harder for Black students to speak up and be heard. The Institute in Malibu High tells us that right away. And it's harder for parents to feel they can speak up and be heard. This is where we need to find those safe spaces for our students and parents.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. May.
I agree with what Mr. Coleman said about reinforcing confidence and so on. And also, I think it would be important to provide after-school tutoring in, let's say, math or other subjects. I think it would be good, especially in elementary school classrooms, to have character-building books more and incorporate in general in the curriculum literature which is going to make children think for themselves, like stories like The Emperor's New Clothes or The Gift of the Magi. And also, again, like I already said, to encourage children to consume positive things, whether it's in the way of TV viewing or movies or video games or books, things that are going to really strengthen them and really bring out their own uniqueness and confidence and innate goodness.
Thank you. Ms. Hickman.
So I do think that Black students face challenges and should be supported, but I don't, I guess to be more specific, I think that every individual situation should be addressed case by case because we're not addressing like the classist issues and the social economic issues and the students who have parents who are involved and those who really don't have absentee parents. And so I wonder if just through more case by case attention and a culture that is looking at the individual situation could be more implemented.
Thank you. Let me turn to Ms. Smith.
Thank you so much. So much has been said, and the one thing that I will add to that is that I think that we need to remember to have all very high expectations for all our students. I think that sometimes that does not occur, and it does not give children a chance to live up to those expectations, and sometimes it gets downplayed for their entire educational career. So I would very much agree with most of everything that has been said, and I won't repeat it.
All right, thank you. Then I'll move on to the next set of questions. And there are two different questions, and they will be directed at a subset of the group. So the next question will be directed at Ms. May, Mr. Johnson, and Ms. Smith. How is an anti-racist teacher different from a colorblind teacher? And I'll begin with Ms. May.
Honestly, I don't see a difference. I guess maybe I'm ignorant in some way, but to me, a colorblind teacher is a teacher who is fair, who does not discriminate in any way against a person based on the person's color or race. So I don't really see a difference. I think we're kind of parsing things too much here. But please, I'll be happy to hear what other people's responses are.
Thank you so much. Then I'll move on to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that there are going to be a lot of people who kind of think a colorblind teacher, what's wrong with that? That's great. Everybody's equal. They shouldn't see color. I know that, that's just not the reality. Part of the anti-racist movement is to get beyond just the platitudes of everybody's equal, everybody should have equality of opportunity and this and that. And all that's very true. But an anti-racist approach causes you as a teacher, as a parent, and we want to teach our students to be more introspective, to take a step back and think for a second. What prejudices, what biases am I bringing to the classroom? And how does that affect the way I teach? How does that affect the way I discipline students? How does that affect the way I talk to the parents? I think it's just a lot of analysis that needs to kind of happen. Sometimes that's going to be facilitated through training, and sometimes that's going to be just some personal insights that you're going to have to get for yourself. Anti-racism is different than being just colorblind.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Sorry. Oh, here I go. Okay. So I think while people feel being colorblind is an admirable belief that everyone gets the same chance, it doesn't acknowledge the history of our country, nor does it have the imperative to take action to correct the cumulative harm that's been done. So, and like the difference between equity and equality, being colorblind does not meet the students at their needs. That's what I would say my difference is.
Thank you so much. So for the remainder of you who didn't get a question the last time around, here's yours. How do you propose addressing the disparity among students of color with respect to excessive suspensions and expulsions? I'll begin with Ms. Hickman.
Gosh, I have to say small class sizes once again, because some situations just require so much attention, and we are all different types of learners, and so I think of that. I really think that every single case needs to be looked at uniquely. Why are people getting these repeat suspensions? Is it something that's missing in the learning curriculum for them? Is it a kinesthetic learning need that we're not providing? Is it being escalated to administration? Is there follow through? Are they getting third-party agencies to help and step in? Are the parents getting involved? So I don't think there is any reason there should be so much repeat suspensions and expulsions in these groups.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Sure, we know we have a disproportionality with suspensions. We are aware of that. Before I talk about suspensions, I want to talk about expulsions first. As a board member, one thing that we actually do is any proposed expulsion comes to the board, and the board has that final decision. I think in the 4 years that I've been on the board, there maybe has been one expulsion that's gone through, and that was at a choice of the family, not a choice of the board. We're looking at restorative justice. We're looking at diversion programs. We're looking at helping students and rebuilding students, not expelling. Suspension, we go back to Dr. Noguera. Dr. Noguera said we have to put systems in place and commit to them and give them time. When Dr. Noguera gave his report, our suspension rate for African-American students was at 4.5, rose to 4.7. Last year was down to 4%. Now, that's not great when our average is 2.4, but it's trending in the right direction. So the question is, are the systems we've put in place now that we're committing to, is it finally starting to make a difference? We'll know more when the new data comes out this year.
Thank you. Mr. Feldman.
Thank you. I equate this to what I've seen to a large degree in the criminal justice system. I see day in and day out young African-American males getting sentenced to a larger degree than white counterparts. And it's not a white collar versus other kinds of crimes. It happens. It happens every day. Why would it be happening in our school system? I think the only solution would be to have another layer of review, to have a diverse body, perhaps of teachers, perhaps of administrators, perhaps of officials that can look at these and make sure that this is being administered fairly. You know, what's at the root of this? You know, in the criminal justice system, I've always said it's fear-based somehow, and it's also about the person, the judge, or whoever's making the decision, not being able to relate as well to the defendant. You know, it's not necessarily an overt racism, but there's something subtle going on, and it's intolerable.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gunn, and thank you for everyone that provided your commentary. You know, I don't really think it's related to small class sizes, because if that was the case, the numbers would indicate that other students would be getting suspended and expelled in similar rates. So I don't really think that it is that. You know, we keep saying, well, how are we going to use restorative justice? How are we going to help the children? It's very interesting that we're projecting this back onto the children as though it's all the children's fault. And that's a very strange narrative that I keep hearing. So let us as adults take responsibility. We want to be our better selves as adults. We're supposed to be here for the children. And the adult in the room, the teacher, is the one who moves that forward to that next escalation level. And so I think that that's incumbent upon the teachers to do their own work internally, along with whatever help that the district can provide with them, so that those kinds of things don't continue to happen in just unconscionable numbers that have nothing to do with math and statistics and probability. And so we want to work on this on a collective level.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to the next question. How should the school district have dealt with last summer's emergence of an Instagram account with students sharing their experiences of racism at Samo High and or the noose incident at Malibu High. The first person would be Mr. Johnson.
I thank you. Both of those issues would be a lot to unpack and worthwhile. If I speak to one, I hope another candidate will speak to the other. I'll start by saying I think the first thing we need to remember is that the Dear Samuel High posts weren't written for us, the parents, the teachers, the administrators. These posts were written by students, for students, and written without us as the audience. And I appreciate Principal Shelton moving swiftly to acknowledge and address the Instagram account with a Zoom he held in July. And I know there's a plan, like we talked about, that the affinity groups will help to create safe spaces for dialogue. So my caution is that we be careful not to town hall and facilitate this thing to death. With adult-led forums and outside consultants, that's going to inevitably shut down student speech and turn off engagement. This has been an authentic expression of where these kids are, how they feel. So let's be sure to honor that and always keep, no matter what we do, keep the student voices first. I will mention very quickly, there were about a dozen posts that called out inappropriate behavior by substitute teachers. That's something we should probably just take on separate from the Dear Samuel High.
Thank you. Ms. Hickman.
Yeah, so I don't know how it was handled. I don't understand the ins and outs of it, but I do know that when these things happen, it would be very important to face them head on and talk about them right away, and make sure that these issues are followed through, and find out any teacher who needs more training or the substitute teachers who need more training. And I think the programs that are being implemented right now in theory are wonderful, and it'll just be very important to see the follow through.
Thank you. Ms. May?
Oh, thank you. I would say that if there was nothing really offensive or inappropriate in these Instagram messages, that the schools don't really need to take any action. But I don't really know the contents, so I can't really say if it would have been appropriate to really delete those messages. And they should be deleted if they were, again, offensive or inappropriate or racist. And then for the other question about the noose incident, that's certainly a serious thing. And it's unfortunate that the teacher was out of the room so much so that these children did this sort of racist, mischievous sort of thing. And that's something that should be dealt with strongly and in accordance with the education code. And I believe it was dealt with, and hopefully that kind of thing is not going to happen again.
Thank you so much. Ms. Smith, I'll turn to you.
So I think that they should continue to have that Dear Samuel High and make sure that students are heard, and maybe find other ways. Obviously, they're going to have the affinity groups, and that program with race, identity, and culture was really good. And maybe all of those students weren't represented, and maybe they should do that again so that more students can have their voices heard. I think that, as we've seen over the last 4 years, leadership is a really, have we seen over the last 4 years in this country, leadership and leading by example makes a strong statement. And I am just so excited to have Dr. Shelton as the leader of Samuel High, because I think that with his leadership, we can create better culture at Samuel High. And I think that they need to keep the dialogue open. I think they do need to talk more to adults. I think adults, separate from the child, separate from the students talking about it, separate from the student affinity groups, I think teachers and everybody on campus should have conversations.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you. I really think that this is a question of beliefs and value systems. Trauma is real, trauma is indelible. And, Aristotle and his focus on eudaimonia and what is the good life and practical wisdom, Well, I think that some of the teachers and substitutes that were doing what they were doing need to go back and read some Aristotle. The news incident was really reflective of a lack of accountability. And so I think we need to go back to the unions, and we need to get rid of this us versus them concept with the teachers union, work in more of a collaborative role so that they can have accountability with themselves as adults and as humans, so that they can keep their teachers accountable. We just want to be better humans and find ways so that these kind of things don't continue to traumatize students that really don't have any protection other than what we bring them as adults. So we need to do a better job at that.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Thank you. And I think I should reinforce what Keith said there at the end. Be better humans. That's a great message. As for Dear Samuel High, I think Dear Samuel High reflects a reality that every high school in our nation is seeing right now. I've heard of Dear Samuel High at Dear Brentwood, Dear Harvard Westlake, Dear wherever. This is a real, it shows you that our students, our young people are speaking up now at a higher rate. They're not willing to suffer in silence, which brings us to what happened in Malibu, which is so deeply disturbing, in that this young man felt he was not heard. He felt he had nowhere to go to be heard. That's what's so incredibly disturbing about it. Not that the other children around him did not have the historical concept to know what that noose represented, which is a failure of curriculum. I don't want to say something that directly at staff. I feel it's not my role as a board member right now. I'm disturbed by what happened in Malibu on many levels.
Thank you so much. Mr. Feldman.
Thank you. This is definitely longer than a minute. I'll try and get to the bottom line on this thing. Dear Samuel High, the noose incident in Malibu, as unacceptable as each of the incidents on Dear Samuel High and noose incident in Malibu is, there are opportunities. There are opportunities to learn about everyone's attitude and to show the students how a fair district operates. We need in response to get a survey out there and learn everybody's attitude about race. And students, parents, members of our community, members of our district community, where are our heads on that? And also, each one of those incidents that was on Dear Samuel High should be investigated, not for punishment, so that we understand what happened, what those individual kids went through. And we need to look at ourselves. If we want more tolerance, we need to be tolerant. If we want fairness, we need to be fair. We need to lead by example as a school board for our district and for our students.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. I believe we got to everyone for that question. Am I correct? Yes. So let me go to the next one. And again, I'm having technical heebie-jeebies. So if you can't hear me, just let me know. This is a question that has a considerable intro, and it will be directed at everyone. A community member sent this in. He prefaced it by noting that the 2016 Benchmark Noguera report states as its central conclusion this comment: for over 20 years, the district has undertaken a number of initiatives to address and reduce racial and social economic disparities in student achievement. However, for a variety of reasons, none of these efforts have reduced disparities in student achievement or produced significant or sustainable improvements in academic outcomes. That was quote. The community member goes on to state that little has changed since that time and asks the following question. Here's the question. What step or steps do you see as necessary to improve the academic success of all district students, especially, quote unquote, African American and Latino students, English language learners, children with learning disabilities, and low-income students generally? I'm going to begin with Ms. Hickman. I hope you heard me.
I did. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to say it again, that all of these cases where our marginalized and minority groups and our Black students and Latino kids aren't getting the attention that they need and deserve within our district, I think does stem that the teachers are overwhelmed with large classroom sizes. And I think that there's a something that's happening in the administration where if a problem is reported, it's not getting, no one's accountable and these problems aren't being followed through. And every individual deserves a specific plan to overcome whatever struggles are happening. And I think it needs to begin in the very beginning, and these children need to be followed all the way through high school.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this is a very similar question to the one we had earlier. In my opinion, again, let's focus on the primary grades to make a guarantee that every child is reading at grade level by third grade, still reading at grade level as they are in middle school. The research is there. When my daughter came up, kindergarten through 12th grade, she had the advantages of class size reductions that had 20-to-1 ratio in kindergarten, 25-to-1 ratios for 4th through 8th grade. We're running in the other direction on that, and that's not really what the voters and the residents and the parents want. We've taxed ourselves again and again to achieve class size reductions, to give that extra when it comes time for schools in our district. We've changed the way literacy coaches work, the pull-out programs, the classroom aides, the teacher training, the parent coaching. We've got to do better.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
I think that part of our issues stem from the opportunities that need to be given to every child. I think that the project-based learning pathway needs to be expanded. I think we need to make bolder choices I think the project-based learning is a really bold choice, and I think that we need to be committed to it so that all kids can have access to lots of different ways of learning, because it does accommodate many, many different learning types. I think that we have systemic issues to look at, and I think that we have barriers that need to be eliminated for kids. I think that we need to I think we need to work on much more parent engagement with kids, with families from every level, and give them every opportunity, expand opportunities for parent involvement.
Thank you so much. Ms. May?
So I think part of the problem for the achievement gap, again, emphasize the word part, is that the assumption that racism is largely the cause of this disparity. Certainly it has a negative impact, but it's not necessarily the only cause. We should look at practices at schools that have high performing Black and brown students. According to famed African-American scholar Thomas Sowell, what these schools had in common was parents who demanded good behavior and learning on the part of their children. And we should also think of children, we should also think of the whole child. It's very important to have proper nutrition, and low-income families often don't get the balanced preference.
Thank you. Mr. Feldman?
Thank you. Again, 1 minute. This is a tough one in 1 minute. If I understand the question correctly, it's hey, we have the Noguera report, we have all good intentions, but why isn't the needle moving on closing the achievement gap? Although I'd like to call it an opportunity gap. I think we need to create more opportunities. We have the Noguera report, but I think part of the problem is we haven't instituted the changes that were recommended. it did provide a roadmap, and that roadmap has not been followed. So we need to make some of the difficult changes and adjustments that the Nogueira report calls for. There are a lot of ways to give support to close the opportunity gap. Early education, we need to refocus on that. Counseling, peer groups, tutoring. We have to deal at some point with the concentration of vulnerable students in only a couple of our schools. Nutrition, healthcare, a lot of those things can help as well.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you very much. I think that this is really about democratizing opportunity for all students. It's also shaping how administrators and teachers view said students as it relates to expectation. I think we want to focus in on driving self-agency, fostering self-determination for students, really boosting intrinsic motivation for students, and really pushing growth mindset for students. In my work at MediaX at Stanford University's Graduate School of Education, we focus in on human sciences and the intersection with technology. In my work in aerobotics with the Tesla Foundation, we focused in on robust characteristics of students, pushing critical thinking, entrepreneurship, and policy. So, we want to give these students these opportunities. They're the future, they're creative, they're brilliant. And if we keep it in a character strengths based narrative and not an achievement gap deficit based narrative, these students will thrive and flourish.
Thank you so much. Mr. King.
So I will quote Dr. Nogueira as he speaks to this better than I will. Rather than expecting change to occur quickly, research shows that sustainable change generally occurs incrementally. District leaders should identify a few complementary initiatives and maintain a sustained focus on them. I believe that the social justice framework and shared accountability are those. I believe now we have to commit and infuse them in everything we do and commit to them. Change takes time. If there were one thing we could do, everybody would be doing this at every district around the world. We have expanded early education so that our learners come to us at age 3 now instead of age 5 or 6. Early intervention, early supports. I believe we need to broaden our schedule in secondary. Our kids need more electives. They need more room to explore. That takes us to the project-based learning thing that Jen mentioned. And then the social emotional supports. It's no good to have all these programs if we don't have supports in place for the students when they need them.
Thank you. This is our last item of the evening, and it's not a question, it's a request. Without referencing the other candidates this evening, please look into the screen and tell us why electing you in particular would give us confidence that long overdue positive changes with regard to racism will occur in the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. I'll begin with Ms. Smith.
Okay. So what I can guarantee is the acknowledgement and assertion that there is a systemic problem of race and identity in our district. I have, and we all have, a moral imperative to eliminate barriers, insist on high expectations, and work to meet every child's needs to be able to learn. What I can guarantee is that I will be bold and I'm committed to reach every child. I believe in the project-based learning program. I believe to be able to engage students in ways we haven't done before and support widened program to address all kids on all campuses. I can guarantee the leadership, commitment, and dedication I have shown for the last 12 years, right in the mix of things, tackling problems, creating community, and building relationships. I can commit and guarantee that I will be on the ground working on every school site with every staff, administrator, parent, student, and continue to meet every child's need, identify every child's need.
Thank you so much. Ms. May?
Yes, thank you. So I feel that I can really make a big difference if I'm on the Board of Education because I have this incredible breadth of experience right on ground zero, so to speak. And I would want to promote truth in everything, history, science, and also to give out information that's been often omitted, especially in the age of COVID. We should give out information about how to strengthen one's immune system. Vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, mushrooms, a whole food plant-based diet, exercise, a good spiritual and social life, and other things that can actually strengthen them and make them also better in their academics. So I feel that I really have a lot to offer. There are injustices.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Thank you. Well, with my colleague, Ms. Leon Vasquez not here, I'm the only one who can say I have been on the board for 4 years. This would be the end of my first term. I joined post Dr. Nagara. I came in here when we had admitted as a district that institutional racism is a problem in our district, and we are committing to addressing it. I think my 4-year track record shows that. I'm open to anybody who calls me and emails. I listen because I know this is not about me, and I know I have to learn from people. That's what I do. I am a conduit from our community to our board. I think there's a lot of exciting things we can do in 4 years. I'd like to see my Santa Monica history class. I want to see capstone begin at our school. I'd like to see dual language at all of our elementary schools. These aren't dreams. These are things we can work towards if we stick to what Dr. Nagara said to do. Build the framework, teach the teachers, change the system so that everybody has the same opportunity to succeed wherever they come from.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. As an elected official representing the students, parents, and taxpayers of Santa Monica and Malibu, I intend to hold the district more accountable to the standards that we've set for them and to the standards they've set for themselves, frankly. What I've observed over my 13 years in the district is that the teachers and site administrators suffer from initiative fatigue. Every year, every other year, we're launching something new, starting over, breaking the mold. We're either chasing some of the latest trends or reacting to the latest headlines. I think a few of us have said what the district needs more than anything else is focus and sustained focus. So I think we should focus on what we're getting right, do more of it. John mentioned immersion. I say music, Project Lead the Way. These are the things we're getting right, and we're making it harder for students to get into those programs and stay in those programs. And the focus needs to be maintained. I've heard we're done with math, we're moving on, test scores haven't budged. We say smaller class size, we're giving up, that was nice. As a new board member, I will not let this latest effort to address systemic racism in our schools drift away without holding our efforts to account.
Thank you. Esther Hickman, Ms. Hickman.
Hi, I think that if I were elected, I would be present on campuses and I would be accessible to students and parents and teachers and learn about these individual cases and hold and be held accountable for that these changes are made and follow students from 3 years old to graduation and make sure that there is a system in place to hold us accountable and every individual be cared for.
Thank you. Mr. Feldman.
Thank you. Listen, I've been on the front lines of the fight against bigotry and systemic racism my entire career as a civil rights attorney. I think what I can bring to the board is to help the board lead by example and be more fair, be unbiased, and attack the systemic racism that still exists in our district. We can do this. One thing I've done is, I've gone back over people's young lives when they've run afoul of the law and dissected how did this happen. I know what the warning signs are. I know what to look for in terms of someone's development in school and at home and where they're in a danger zone. As a district, we can do this. We can overcome this. This is Santa Monica. This is Malibu. We can do this.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you. Well, as a school board member, I would listen and lead in a collaborative fashion. I'm humble enough to say that I can't guarantee anything because there are no guarantees. but I would commit to working as I have as co-chair of the Intercultural Equity and Excellence Committee to fight for just those things, equity and excellence for all students in the district. You know, racism is alive and well in the district. You know, swastikas on the chalkboard at Samo High, obviously the noose incident in Malibu, N-word in classrooms. And so we need to change in belief systems. We need to change in values. My interdisciplinary efforts in governmental affairs, economic research, policy, angel investment, ed tech, and critical thinking, I think can help serve to sort of change the narrative in the relationship with the teachers union so they can be more of an ally rather than an opposite and an us versus them relationship. Through this vision of collective impact, and actually what it is, it's servant leadership. Servant
Thank you.
leadership.
Thank you so much. Let me move to the closing remarks. And we've had an extended period of time because of the technical difficulties. But on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund and the Committee for Racial Justice, we thank all of you for taking part in tonight's candidate forum and for stepping forward to run for office. We also thank Sharon Hart, our timer, and Natalia Zerniskaya, our forum tech administrator. To the audience, I'd like to say this forum has been live streamed to YouTube and will be available for replay on the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica channel. For more information on both local and state elections, we encourage you to check out Voters Edge at www.votersedge.org. Voters Edge is the League of Women Voters of California nonpartisan online guide to federal, state, and local elections. We invite you all to join us on Sunday, October 4th for our Santa Monica City Council Candidates Forum, again co-sponsored by the Committee for Racial Justice and the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. To find a listing of our forums and the registration links, please go to the League website at www.lwvsantamonica.org. We'd like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us and for your interest. It truly takes all of us to make democracy work. And remember, elections are won by those who vote. Thank you so much and have a good evening.